Welcome to the Sci-Fi Shorts podcast, the podcast for both readers and writers in the sci-fi genre. Here is your host into the worlds beyond, J. Charles Ramirez.
Welcome back, readers and writers, to the Sci-Fi Shorts podcast. Joining me today is a veritable giant in the SFS group. An award-winning writer and editor, utilizing more than 30 years of professional experience in the field, he's had articles published in places such as Harvard Business Review, The Guardian, Wall Street Journal, and more. He's also found success in his own published books, scripts, TV documentaries for NPR, the BBC, and PBS, and playwriting. Originally from Liverpool in the UK, he now lives on the East Coast in the United States with his wife and 2 adult children. Anyone who keeps an eye on our website or our Facebook page has definitely come across his name at least once a week at this point. KB Cottrill, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here, J. Charles.
It's truly a pleasure to have you as well. Like I said, you are a huge name for us here at SFS. We definitely see that name very often. Anybody who checks out our Facebook page on the regular has seen your bylines and read your, quite frankly, amazing stories.
Thank you.
Now, as you've told me before, you've truly had an extensive career in both professional and creative writing, though these two experiences do seem like they couldn't be any further apart. Has there been any interesting interactions that you found from juggling the two from an editing or even a writing standpoint?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap between the two. I mean, I guess it's probably more of an overlap from the professional to the creative. I found that, for example, working as a journalist, particularly a freelancer, I was a freelancer for some years. You have to keep coming up with fresh ideas because the established ideas are usually being covered by staffers. So to make a living, you have to keep coming up with new angles on existing ideas or coming up with brand new ideas. And so I think that stands me in good stead as a creative writer. And I also got used to researching, to talking to people. And also, and this is, I think, is really important for any creative writer. I think I'd be lucky enough to be involved in communities that are, ideas communities where ideas are exchanged and bounced around, where new ideas are, there's always a willingness to consider new ideas, whether that be with an editor, whether that be with people I work for. And I think that's important too. So I'd say, expose yourself to those communities and those environments.
Right. I can only imagine. Like you said, that you've kind of had to make a living out of learning to think around new ideas. And
Right.
That is definitely something that any kind of creative writer can find some lessons in. You think about it, like, it feels like all the stories, at their base level have kind of all been told already. It's just a lot of retellings and reformulating new these same old ideas into these new exciting experiences. So I can definitely appreciate how being around that kind of community where you're constantly trying to push for these new ideas and these new ways of presenting these ideas would be a great benefit for creative writing in particular. And among those great lessons that you buried in there, it seems like these are sort of the ideas that kind of transcended across these different kind of writing disciplines. What do you think some of your most memorable takeaways or your most memorable moments of your career that has helped teach you how to take your own writing to the next level?
Again, going back to my journalistic days, I learned a lot of lessons that have really helped me a lot creatively. So, for example, I've learned not to be a prima donna when I'm getting edited. I know, I understand why writers feel very, very attached to their writing, and they should. But I've had some great editors down the years, and I learned very quickly that a good editor is like gold, and they're not your enemy; they're your ally. And even now when I write, I've written fairly recently for a newspaper, and I still get edited. I still make mistakes. I still make mistakes on Sci-Fi Shorts. So I think a little bit of humility goes a long way in writing. So I think I've certainly learned that. I've learned that, again, going back to my journalistic days, I think just the turnover of ideas is important. So you kind of get an intuition for those ideas that you think will work. I think we're essentially ideas people, writers, and we have sort of monkey brains that are
Hmm.
always on the move. Um, and so you can come up with 10 ideas. It's picking the one that you think has got legs. And again,
Right.
you develop that intuition as a commercial writer. Um, the other thing you develop, particularly for newspaper journalism, is you develop a sense that you have to hook the reader very quickly, otherwise they just won't continue with the article. And you have to present your ideas in a very compelling way up front.
Right.
And you have to be concise. All those disciplines are invaluable, particularly for a flash fiction environment.
Definitely. And like you said, I mean, that first sentence, that first paragraph, it's really got to hook you in there, or else,
Absolutely.
people won't make it through. I mean, even with novel writing, if that first page isn't gripping enough, then, most people just, put down the novel, or just not finish it.
Yeah.
And going back to your point on editors, I really appreciated that, because a good editor is invaluable, like you said. I mean, there's a difference between an editor that doesn't help you preserve your own voice as an author, and there's a much wider gulf between an editor that knows how to take your work to the next level while preserving that individuality that the author brings to the table. And I mean, even myself, I use some editing aids, such as Pro Writing Aid, Grammarly, stuff like that, just to kind of polish it up
Right.
before I send it to the real
Right.
editors to get a real idea of how I can improve. And just finding those great editors is definitely something that every writer should strive for.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, forgive me for saying this, but I'm actually only 28. I haven't even been alive for 30 years yet. And while I recognize that the growth that I experienced from like adolescence to adulthood is quite different than the growth that you experience over a professional career after over 30 years in the field, um, both creatively and professionally, do you happen to find your passions or your intentions towards writing to have changed at all?
No, I mean, I think I'm still as compelled to write as I was when I was a teenager consuming science fiction as if it was going out of fashion. I don't think I mean, writing is a compulsion. Um,
Mhm.
I'm sure there's some shrink out there that can give us some reasons for that, but I don't know what it is. I don't know why, but it is a compulsion. And
Mhm.
I'm no less compelled these days than I was when I started. I guess one thing that has changed over the years is I've become um, a bit more thoughtful for uh, using my writing to make some sort of a contribution. I mean,
Okay.
I'm no George Orwell, but I think any writer has got. If you're a writer and you have a compulsion to write, and you have a point of view, I think you almost have a responsibility to put it out there in some way. Um, and um, and I've become more conscious of that over the years. That while writing can be a very hard taskmaster, um, keep in mind that you are communicating something, and because you're compelled to do it, you've probably got something very useful to say. So say it.
Mhm. I agree. I mean, I've maintained my own passion for that writing, just because, for once, like you did say, with a voracious appetite, excuse me, a voracious appetite for reading has definitely stoked the fires of creative writing. I mean, all writers are
Yeah,
readers essentially,
yeah,
and as long as you can maintain that good balance of reading novels, I'm sure the compulsion, like you said, will be there to continue writing.
yeah.
But just beyond that proven track record of yours, you do seem to be publishing at an almost breakneck pace for sci-fi shorts at this point, having already published over a dozen since we transitioned to our new site. How have you managed to maintain that pace of creating stories while at the same time holding yourself to that higher standard of flash fiction?
Well, I think it comes back to what we discussed about the developing um, developing some sort of a mechanism for yourself to
Hmm.
write. learning the lessons that you learn along the way. But I think one of the biggest, aids to productivity for a writer is, and it can take time, but over the years to actually develop your particular, you know, magic formula for getting the stuff in
Hmm.
your head onto the page. And every writer has their own magic formula. I mean, for me, it's sometimes I get an idea that's so compelling, I just let it marinate in the back of my mind for a day or two, and then I can write a whole first draft right away. I mean, it obviously needs editing, but I can certainly get the first draft out. Other
Hmm.
times, and I would say this is probably the majority of times, um, I come up with ideas that need to be developed, and then I'll probably need to journal it in some way, just to pull out some of the angles and nuances that I haven't immediately thought of, and so that takes a bit more time. Um, but I'm very used to that process. I'm very at home with it, and I think
Hmm.
once you've established that process for yourself, it's probably your most powerful productivity tool because you know exactly how to go about the business of writing.
Right. And yeah, it's up to the writer to figure out their own, path towards disciplining themselves to keep writing. I mean, for myself, I have several different ways that I maintain that I find myself more productive early in the morning. Or like you said, if an idea hits you at the right moment, it can stop everything else that you have going in its tracks and demand your attention. I mean, I've never been one to try and discipline myself like the way like maybe Stephen King had, where he
Right,
set out every day to write from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m.
right,
Even if he only got 10 words down that day, he would lock himself in a room until he wrote.
right.
And he would spend that entire time focused only on that task. Now, that is something that I haven't quite been able to get my head around. It's more like when I finally sit down and have the strength and the mental will to begin writing, then I find the words to kind of flow out of the page. But that first word's always kind of the hardest to get
I,
through.
oddly enough, and I think this probably harks back to my newspaper days. I don't find it too difficult to start writing once I've got the motivation and the compulsion. Um, but but I understand that for some people, that is an issue. But somebody said, and I can't remember the author, but some author said that you know writing is waiting for the muse to descend on your shoulder, and she better descend at 9 o'clock every morning. And I think that's
Yeah.
right. The muse certainly is required, but the muse has to be there
Hmm.
at a certain time.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, sometimes it just it strikes you, and it strikes you at the right time. Um, so I totally. That is a great quote. I'm gonna have to research that after this. Try and figure that out. Put it on a paper somewhere and hang it up so I can look at it every morning.
Yeah.
But speaking of your specific pieces in sci-fi shorts, one of your more recent writings was entitled "Crossing the Line." I really like this story because immediately my mind went to Stephen King's The Dark Tower. Speaking of Stephen King, in particular, your main character there was named Roland, like King's own gunslinger in his series. Then there's a story itself, which reminded me very much, if any readers and fans of the Dark Tower series remembers, of Blaine the Pain, the monorail that was a sort of rogue sentient AI that encompassed much of the third novel there. While we're dealing with murderous hauler trucks instead of a train here, I do find a lot of common ground with the situation that you pose in the story. With the increase in self-driving accidents and troubles and the increase of AI itself, do you think we're moving quickly into a society where, well, AI assisted crimes are going to become much more likely to occur?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for the likening me to Stephen King, which I don't consider myself to be even sitting in the same room as him. But and I'm a bit behind on the Tower, I must say. I've only read The Gunslinger so far, so I have to get into that. So the Roland thing was a pure coincidence, to be honest. Um, but yeah, to answer your question, yes, I mean, I think that's inevitable, to be honest. I mean, if you look at, the problems we're having in security and, um, databases being breached all the time, every time we come up with a new security measure, the bad guys find a way around it. and so it's inevitable that they're going to evolve with AI. And so I think that's a whole universe I think that SF writers may want to explore, because it's really in its infancy, unfortunately. I mean, I always think that, if we could harness a fraction of the bad guys' creativity, we'd be in good shape, for good. We'd be in good shape. But,
Yeah.
they always manage to come up with something else.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, it's this technology is growing so rapidly, and it seems like individuals, well-meaning or sinister, they can adapt to these changes much faster than like the laws of the land can. I
Right.
mean, the government moves so slow, it takes by the time we can get any laws enacted, it seems like the next big technology crisis is occurring. And that's what I'm seeing with everything going on there. And in fact, the more and more that AI seems to grow, the more I question it. Like why, um, like I said, it's become this deep sea of creativity among sci-fi writers of our generation and our time. Because I mean, how do you really quantify these nebulous concepts such as morality and
Yeah.
into like hardwired logic paths for AI software? How do you legislate to know what's right and wrong with these things? Do you think that maybe this is something that could naturally occur? Do you think that we're kind of doomed to this kind of like hard line, black and white processing and problem solving that we have to do to kind of fight against the problems that AI seems to be able to cause?
It's really difficult. I do a lot of work for MIT, and so I'm kind of steeped in this stuff. I read a book recently. It's a really good book called The Age of AI and Our Human
Hmm.
Future. And it has three authors, three kind of thought leaders in this area, who are just writing essays on different aspects of AI. And one of the morality sort of aspect does come up. The problem with predicting what's going to happen with AI is even the experts don't really know how these complex algorithms evolve. They really don't. There's a great anecdote in that book I've just mentioned, of I think probably about 10, 12 years ago, maybe more now. Um, I think it was IBM that decided to develop a program to play chess. And so they programmed all the moves that ever been made, all the games ever been played into this program. And it was very successful. They pitched it against some grandmasters, and it had a pretty high success rate. More recently, a few years ago, a bunch of researchers at MIT decided to do the same thing using an algorithm, using AI. But this time, instead of programming all the known games and moves, they just simply taught the algorithm the rules and said, go away and learn.
Hmm.
You know, plumb the internet, go away and learn yourself. And it did. And it did it in a fraction of the time that the program did.
Hmm.
But here's the kicker. The kicker is that in addition to it increasing the success rate of its victories compared to the IBM program, it actually came up with original moves. And we've been playing this game for like 1,000 years. They had chess grandmasters watching this thing. They had Gary Kasparov watching it, and he
Hmm.
was stunned. And he basically said, "This thing is just shaking the foundations of chess." And the point of this is that we don't really know how this algorithm came up with these moves. It's because it has this incredible capacity to spot patterns, um, and to actually come up with moves that grandmasters have not actually thought of is kind of unbelievable, really. But that's what happened.
Yeah,
So
I do remember that research there.
predicting how AI,
I've seen it. It's ridiculous. I
it's crazy.
apologize for cutting you off
No,
there.
no, not at all. It's crazy. I've given up trying to predict what AI is going to do. I think the problem is that it's on a plane of thinking that we don't understand yet, and that can only get more complicated.
Yeah, to that point, I mean, it does seem like almost an alien life form in and of itself. I
Yeah,
mean, the reasoning, the processing, and the thought process, patterns is just so alien to our experience, which is drives that complexity of the argument with or against AI about just like how it grows and changes.
Right.
But beyond just the fun and scary things that you can write with AI, I did find that a lot of your flash fiction does tend to focus a bit more on like the more humdrum parts of life, with just like a small little twist or an ingenious idea on a situation that has you both kind of laughing and questioning yourself. Past science fiction, past AI, do you think that your own day-to-day life inspires you to write these kinds of science fiction stories?
Definitely, yeah. I'm trying to think of examples. So, for example, my wife the other week was railing against how the job application process is totally broken, and she's very angry about this, and that triggered the story Here Come the Humans, which I turned that sort of argument on its head, where now it's humans that are interviewing androids. So that's how that started. Sometimes I'll use my own experience professionally. So a couple of stories, Crossing the Line is one of them that I've used. I do a lot of supply chain work with MIT, so that comes from that. As does a story called Impulse Buy. Sometimes I'll use old stories. I came across an old story a long time ago, and it was awful. I'd written this a long time ago, and it was dreadful. But the base idea, I loved it. So I turned it into a sci-fi short, and so sometimes I'll do that too. I think the trick, I think it's trying to turn reality on its head.
Hmm.
You know, let me explain by giving you an example. Some years ago, I attended an exhibition of surrealism painting in London. It was a wonderful exhibition. But one of the paintings that stood out to me, and I can't remember who painted it. I think he's a contemporary artist. But anyway, it was a painting of the Pope on a surfboard being towed at high speed by a speedboat, and his mitre was bent double with the strength of the wind, and so his robes were flowing, and he had like a childlike expression on his face, and it was a wonderful, wonderful sort of painting. But it turns reality on its head with a dollop of
Hmm.
humor, and I think that's, for me, that's the sort of the um, that's the ultimate. Those ideas are great, and that's what I always try to do. I try to look at mundane things and try to look at them in a different light.
Yeah, I agree, and they're definitely fun experiences to be able to share and to twist, because you can inject some like great humor, some great vision into these kind of stories. I mean, probably one of the more interesting questions that I've had, that you posed in your recent writings does have to be in that story you mentioned a couple minutes earlier. Here Comes Humans. That was a world where, like you said, androids and robots have already taken over almost every aspect of the labor market. To the fact that androids were the ones that were conducting the interviews for other androids. The interplay that you did craft between your two main characters there, Connie and Magellan, was really beautiful. And like you said, it's a great look at like the small parts of life that go unnoticed every day, but you add a sci-fi situation to them, then all of a sudden it's a quite compelling
Right.
story. I mean, it
Right.
reads almost like the reverse to what the ramp up to fully automated workforce would look like, something that we are beginning to experience today. Um, I like I said, I really appreciated like the questions that you posed there. I mean, it is this sort of like ebb and flow where you go from one extreme straight over to the other.
Right.
Now it seems like the pendulum in your story is swinging back the other way.
Right.
Do you think that, based on what you wrote, do you think that it's just a nature of society for things to go one way, one direction, and then swing all the way back to the other, always questioning for that sort of better way, reverting to, I don't know, like past choices that we've made, even if we know the shortcomings or even if we'd lost sight of those shortcomings?
Yeah. I mean, I think that is a natural rhythm of things. We tend to, come up with an innovative idea, and then if it's exciting, we really take it to breaking point. And then when we find that maybe we've got a bit too far, we suddenly plunge, the pendulum swings back again. I think the danger of that, you know, in in our current world where we're so polarized, we're so politically polarized. We've gone into the habit of falling back on old chestnuts and prejudices and discredited theories, and it seems to me it's become even more of a thing that we automatically snap back into the old thinking, because of the way that we've become polarized and the way that falling back on prejudices has become acceptable.
Yeah, it does seem, it's just like, it feels like a natural part of the human experience at this point,
Yeah,
where I mean, groups have this sort of tendency to kind of revert back on that kind of like hive mind mentality. You have your ins and your outs, and even if you have all the evidence to the contrary, sometimes it's easier to support your own biases than
right,
it is to accept conflicting information. And
right.
again, that's what I think makes your sci-fi writing so compelling, especially in that story, Here Comes Humans, which I really did enjoy. But I mean, alongside that, to mention again the humdrum of life, it is really great reading sci-fi that doesn't really focus on these giant, huge world-ending conflicts. Saying that, being a writer who does tend to focus almost exclusively on those kinds of settings and conflicts, I blame my love for comic books and superheroes for that. But it's just these boring everyday experiences that you seem to posit have these just world changing experiences for people who haven't lived it. And again, it's just another aspect of sci-fi that is extremely enjoyable to explore, I suppose. But if nothing else, your flash fiction, among many others, have left me questioning, which is, like I always try and tell people, it's a sign of great science fiction if you leave your reader questioning themselves afterwards. But as we come to an end here, as we wrap up, I did just want to thank you for your time. Your work speaks for itself, and I definitely had a blast hearing about it from you. But at this point, do you happen to have any projects, big or small, in the works now that we can look forward to in the near future?
Yeah, I've just finished, or about to finish, a collection of short stories. So they're kind of Roald Dahl type of stories. Not there's some science fiction in there, but it's not totally science fiction. So I've just about finished that now. I'm going to edit it over the next few weeks. Um, I have my blog. I have a Substack blog called Tilted Tales, which contains a lot of my satire and general, um, writing. I've neglected it recently, but I'm going to get back to that. And the twin of it is on Medium, KB Cottrill.
Mhm.
I've got a blog on Medium. That's basically a replication of the Substack um, newsletter. Um, and I've got another book project in the works, but it's very early days of that, so I've got a bit of time, been put more time into actually developing that idea. So I'll do that over the next few months. So pretty busy.
Sounds great. It's always good to have a busy schedule as a writer. I mean, keep writing, keep earning, and keep showing off these great ideas that you seem to have. We're definitely going to be looking forward to that in the near future. But once again, thank you very much. Now, for you guys watching, to read more of KB Cottrill's writing, you can check out his author profile over at sci-fi-shorts.co, including the stories that we reviewed today. You can also visit his Medium page for more of his non-science fiction related works, as well as his Substack. For all of us here at Sci-Fi Shorts, thank you for your time, happy writing, and good luck discovering your own new worlds. Goodbye.
Sci-Fi Shorts and the Sci-Fi Shorts podcast are products of SFS Publishing. Music by Valence.